Alright, so how are you guys doing? This is going to be an introduction to Icelandic grammar, specifically the nouns. This isn't going to be a super in-depth video. I'm going to make more later, but going to go a little bit easy with it so it's not too much at once. This is just going to cover the general concept of how nouns work within Icelandic, their declension by case and things like that. And how that works. So, yeah, I was going to make this video a little bit longer, but add verbs and things like that. But Icelandic grammar is fairly complicated, I think, for most people. So we're just going to stick to the nouns for this video. And something to note about the nouns in Icelandic is there are about, depending on how it's counted, 70 or just under 70 different declension patterns, meaning that the nouns that belong to each pattern or paradigm um, have a specific way of changing, and there are a total of 8 possible changes that can occur, one per case, both singular and then again for the plural. So usually it's not so dramatic. Thankfully, that it doesn't change too much. Usually there are a couple that are fairly similar. For example, the accusative and the genitive plural of masculine nouns tend to often be the same. Not always the case, but they do tend to be coincide. So even though there are more possibilities, 8 total, like I said, it usually isn't that dramatic. And so yeah, that's kind of the basic part of the introduction we're going to go over. So we're going to try to make a video for each of the declension, or each pattern, each paradigm, is another word that's used. And like I did with the Gothic video, gonna give an example and then, maybe 5 nouns per example, and then list some other nouns that, are part of that declension, as well as their meaning and whatnot, of course. And so we're gonna go from there, start looking at how this works, how the grammar is broken down and whatnot. All right, and so these are the 3 essential words for understanding Icelandic nouns, adjectives, and the article. And these words are gender, case, and number. So for gender, we're talking about not necessarily the biological sex of a living being. Gender applies to everything in the language of Icelandic. A table has a gender, a light has a gender, the sky, the house and whatnot, you know. In the case of house, for example, it is neuter, but window is masculine. Why, I don't know. That's just just how the language works. So that's really essential to understanding how the declension patterns work, right? And so for Icelandic, we have, I believe, about 70 different patterns by which nouns can decline. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot, and don't worry. There are a lot of similarities with them, between them, as they are broken down primarily by gender, and then broken down further by how they change within each of those gender patterns. So, for example, out of those 70 patterns, we have 30 about that are masculine, about another 30 that are feminine, and then about 10 patterns that are neuter. And the masculine are probably the most complex, and in a sense regular, though, so making them a little bit easier, but they do tend to change a lot. Words like fjord in English, I believe it's, yeah, fjord in English, which is fjordur in Icelandic. And that word changes a lot, not only the endings, but the stem vowel, meaning the vowel, when you take away the ending, you have what's called a stem, and kind of like the root, if you can think about it that way. And so the vowel in that will also change. So some of them can get pretty complicated, but there's also a lot of them for the masculine that are pretty predictable, as the endings do tend to be the same. The feminine, however, tend to be a little bit easier in that they don't change as much. Typically, your genitive singular and your nominative and accusative plurals are going to be frequently the same, and there's no real change in the singular for the most part. But for the plural, there is a little bit of change that goes on. The same with all the other nouns in the dative plural and the genitive plural. When it comes to neuter nouns, on the other hand, they're kind of in between. They don't change much at all, really, even in the plural. Compulsively, what's the word? They have to change, like all their nouns in the dative and genitive plurals, respectively. However, most neuter nouns tend to stay the same, whether for the nominative and the accusative forms, in the plural and the singular, they're the same. So, for example, the word hus, which means house, yeah, very similar. You can see the common vocabulary, the common relation between English and Icelandic there. Um, for that's both. That could mean if you just say hus, that could be singular nominative, accusative, or plural nominative and accusative, right? If you add the article, it'll change slightly. So for the singular, it'd be husith, husith, and then for the plural, it'd be husin, husin. So there's a slight difference, but even within the plural, it stays the same, and within the singular, it stays the same. Uh, there are some exceptions, some plural forms of neuter nouns will change. For example, very common one, barn, which means child, becomes in the nominative and accusative plural forms, respectively. It becomes burn, so that becomes an and that has to do with, I believe, grammar, from historical grammar. You'll see that sometimes in Icelandic. This is actually very important to note that it's a little bit of a rule in the pronunciation that if a u, which is like spelled as you in English, is added to the end, it causes a change of an inside the word, like the previous to become an which is an o with two dots, and so you'll see that some cases. All right, and now we're going to look at the case. So nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. So these are four cases. You're probably not going to be familiar with these unless if you're an English-only speaker, or if you speak, a lot of non-European languages or their modern forms. So case is basically, if you want to put it the easiest way possible, is in English you have the pronouns, I, me, mine, he, him, his. And so those are only three cases, though. You have your nominative, which is I or he or she, which is basically means subject. The accusative, which is I believe, direct object. What's being acted upon. I take the cup. That is an accusative. I look at him. I look at her. She's looking at me. That's accusative. Dative is I give him the dog, I gave her the money, so the person receiving the thing. Dative is also frequently used with location and where something is. So it's also partially, in a sense, the location case or locative. And there is the genitive, which typically shows possession. And so that means, like in English, when you add s to something like the man's dog, the dog's food, we know what belongs to what based on that s, and so it's actually basically the same in Icelandic. You know, that's pretty straightforward there. And there are four cases, right? And so the form will typically change to some degree, or maybe not. Of each, the form of each noun will change to some degree based on the case and whether it's in the plural. So you'll have a different form even if it's the same case based on whether or not it's plural or singular. And what gender it belongs to typically determines how the case endings will be added. So there is, so it's important to know what the gender is in order to properly use the cases as well. All right, next we have number, singular, dual, and plural. Dual is no longer used in Icelandic, so in older texts and whatnot, you'll find that. But and that's something you might have to learn later on if you're interested in reading older texts, which is one of the main draws of learning Icelandic. So yeah, singular is we've already gone over it partly and talking about the cases, right? So if you have say the word hundur, which means dog, that is the because of the UR ending, we know that this is the subject. It is the dictionary form. It is the singular. But if you said hundar, that u becomes you drop the UR and add an AR instead, that becomes a plural, right? So that is nominative dogs. And then if you just have an a at the end, that is either plural form for the accusative or the genitive, so hunda. So you'll typically be able to tell the endings, as I said, with the cases, the dative and the genitive plural cases. They are the same endings for all nouns. It really doesn't matter, so that's very, very easy to tell. Sometimes the dative plural is similar to the dative singular of masculine nouns, but typically you can tell the difference. It's fairly easy. There's a little bit of a difference. Hundunum versus, say, hundum. So the unum, lets you know that it's a plural. So with the article attached. So yeah, numbers fairly straightforward, easy to tell. Important to know though, because it's impossible to properly decline nouns if you don't know that. So this is actually very important in looking up nouns. When nouns are introduced, if they're introduced properly in textbooks or in dictionaries, they'll give you typically, they should be introduced in the nominative form, nominative singular form, right? So in the case of, say, dog, that would be hundur. And then following that, you would get the ending, not the full form, just the ending for the dative. In this case, hundi. So you'd get a little dash sign with an I, or a hyphen sign with an followed by an I. And then you'd get a comma followed with the genitive singular, right? Which would then be comma, dash, hyphen S, comma, and then you get the nominative plural. And that would be hyphen AR. And so again, I don't think I said that entirely clearly, but it's dative singular, genitive singular, followed by the nominative plural, right? So just those endings, unless the noun changes heavily, in which case it would be appropriate to give you all of the forms. Now, this being said, most dictionaries, or particularly, not necessarily all dictionaries, but particularly workbooks or textbooks, should be introducing tables. So you should get about 70 different tables for noun declensions, and they should come with a corresponding number in order for you to verify that, to check it out, to see if it's one of the nouns that changes heavily, less heavily. Another thing is that a lot of nouns, a lot of books may or may not include the dative singular. That one's a little more optional, but it absolutely has to have the genitive singular ending and the nominative plural ending, because without those you cannot properly decline a noun. And I'll give you an example. You might say, well, I know the noun hundur, and that's a masculine noun, okay? And the ending is UR, so I know, okay, I know that pattern. It becomes hundur, it goes from hundur to hund to hundi to hunds, right? And that's all the singular. Well, okay, we have another masculine noun, fjörður, and you might think, oh, okay, it's the same thing, right? It's a UR ending, so we'll drop the UR, and you're correct. You do drop the UR, and you get fjörð for the accusative. And you think with the dative, okay, well, like hundi, okay, well, hundi, right? So we'd add E at the end, or I, an English I. But, in which is correct, you do add that. However, it causes a change. You drop the Y in the beginning, the first syllable, right? So that becomes firði, not fjörði like you would expect, but firði, F-I-R-eth-I. Eth is the for you, those who don't know, is the letter that produces an English th sound, like that. It used to be used in English, is not anymore. I don't know why. I think they want to model it more after Latin, but it's still used in Icelandic. And so you'll see there, by the way, though, that is a little bit of a difference, right? So that that y changes to an I, which is unexpected. And then you think, well, okay, what about the genitive singular, right? And that goes from that's an S, right? And that isn't. That's actually an AR, what you would expect in the plural, and that which causes again a change. So instead of dropping the y, so you have fjarðar, right, instead of fjords, which is what you would expect looking at the masculine pattern for for hundar. So that's why it's really really essential to know these things, because even in the plural, for example, hundar for nominative singular in the case of fjordur, which is fjord by the way, is fjordir. So instead of an AR, you get an IR. And again, for the accusative plural, it's actually different. It's not an A. It's not identical with the genitive like many nouns are, or like many masculine nouns are in the plural. It's actually fjerde. So it's the same as the dative singular. So that's why it's actually very essential to know these endings. All right, so I'm going to give three examples. I'm going to use three nouns, one from each gender. So hundr for dog, which is going to be masculine, skeið, which is spoon, feminine, and then we're going to look at hús, which is neuter. So again, that's three of a total of 70 possible patterns, and we're going to give them once with out the article and then once with the article. So we have here hundr in the singular column from nominative to genitive. Hundr, hund, hundi, hunds. Hundar, hunda, hundum, hunda. All right, and now we have, following the same pattern, we're going to start from the singular and then move into the plural, but this time we're going to have the article attached to it. So hundurinn, hundin, hundinum, hundsins, hundarnir, hundana, hundunum, hundana. All right. So you'll notice here that the nominative and accusative article is actually the same. However, the noun itself does change. For the case, and you'll notice here too, something very important is that the articles tend to actually match the endings. You'll notice here, for example, hunds and hundsins. So both the article ends in an S and the noun. In the case of hundarnir, plural nominative, both the article and noun end in an R. This case of the accusative and the genitive both do end in an A. Both the noun and the articles for both end in an A. And as for the dative plural, it ends in actually it would technically end in two M's, but that's actually avoided, and instead you get num. So N is the end of the noun is dropped and replaced with the article. So, but it keeps the so hundunum. So it's a little bit of a different pronunciation. Sometimes it'll be similar to the singular. So hundum versus not singular, the without the article form. So hundum versus hundunum. All right, now we're looking at the feminine form, and you'll notice here that for this paradigm, most of it looks pretty much the same. There's not a lot of changing outside of the mandatory dative and genitive plural changes, but we're going to go ahead and read it anyway in the same way as before. So starting out from the singular column, top to bottom, skeið, 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 skeiðar, 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 skeiðum, skeiða. So you notice here there's not really a change. The genitive singular is the same ending as the plural, nominative, and accusative. This is a pattern that actually holds fairly true or stays fairly similar even for things like pronouns, adjective declension, and things like that. So it's actually very important to notice these patterns early on, because they are the same or at least very similar for many of the other things that change, like pronouns, adjectives. So. And again, we have the mandatory changes and adding of and a in the dative and genitive, so a plural. All right, and now we have the feminine form, skeiðin, with the article. So starting from the singular, skeiðin, skeiðina, skeiðinni, skeiðarinnar, skeiðarnar, skeiðarnar, skeiðunum, skeiðanna. All right, so you'll notice here that the article itself actually changes fairly heavily, particularly in the singular. We do have a great deal of similarity still, however, with the genitive singular and the nominative and accusative plural. However, you'll notice that there is still a slight difference with particularly with the double N. And in the plural, we do not get the I as well, though. So the in is dropped, and you only get one. You only get nar. So that's actually the same declension pattern for the adjectives. They are not going to be exactly the same. You'll get, I believe, for the genitive singular, a strong declension for adjectives, for example, will be ra. So rikra, and then rikrar, and then you'll have rikar, for the nominative, accusative declensions, plural declensions, respectively. All right, here we're winding down. We now have the neuter paradigm, and hus, so house, very similar. We're going to start out like we do with the other ones from the singular column. Hus, husi, hus, husum, husa. So again, you can see here the plural, dative, genitive, the same, just add and a. And adjust for any changes that might occur with an a becoming an but that doesn't happen in this case. You can notice here, very important, is that the nominative and accusative form is the same for both. So half of the word is just the same. There's absolutely no change. It's only really, at the bottom here that we see husi, hus. So that's important. That's the change that does occur. So now we're going to look at the this form with the article. Right, and same as before, we're going to start from singular. Husith, husid, husinu, husins, husin, husin, husinum, husanna. Excuse me. I read that a little bit quick, a little bit low on time here for memory on the computer, so I'll have to kind of keep this quick. Going to notice a quick pattern, quick point of reference, very quick and important to note, is that husin, again, not much of a change. That is the plural form. You'll notice, though, that the article in this case is the same as the nominative singular of the feminine. And that is a pattern that is consistently followed throughout Icelandic grammar, that the neuter, plural, accusative, and nominative will be the same as the nominative singular of the feminine. So that's important to note. A little bit of a contrast to other Germanic languages. The dative and genitive. The genitive article is the same as the masculine. However, for the neuter. However, the neuter dative singular article changes. That's actually kind of uncommon for other Germanic languages like German or Gothic. So that's a side note for those of you who are interested in related languages to Icelandic. Again, obligatory dative genitive plural being unum and anda. So yeah, this is just kind of an overview of the Icelandic grammar, introduction to the of the nouns in particular. I'm going to go ahead and do videos regarding more declension patterns later, and going to go more in depth in these patterns as well in other videos, but this is just to give you kind of an idea of how nouns in particular work, and this will actually relate very, very closely to the pronouns and the adjectives as well, and how they decline. I know I've already said that, but it's really important with grammar in particular to really, really repeat these things until they become second nature. So, and yeah, so we'll try to do more videos with more in-depth breakdowns of these paradigms, and we'll try to get those up soon. I'll probably do them in different languages as well, particularly German, maybe Dutch, and or Japanese as well. So for people who speak those languages, that might be a little bit more fun. So thanks for watching. Have a good day.